In the scorching heat of the New Mexico desert, where survival depends on the kindness of strangers and the strength of the human spirit, unfolds a story that will challenge everything you believe about loyalty, love, and the power of compassion to heal even the deepest wounds. This is the incredible tale of Ryder Mackenzie, a solitary cowboy who discovered that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't facing down danger, but choosing to care for someone when their own family has abandoned them. If you're ready for a story that will restore your faith in human goodness and prove that true heroes are found in the most unexpected places, hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing tales of compassion and second chances. Don't forget to let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love connecting with our incredible global community. Abandoned in the desert, the merciless August sun was beginning its descent toward the Sangre de Cristo Mountains when Ryder Mackenzie first spotted the wagon stop beside the old trade road that cut through the high desert of northern New Mexico. From his position on a rocky outcropping where he'd been tracking a missing calf, the scene below looked wrong in ways that made his weathered cowboy instincts scream warnings. At 38, Ryder had spent most of his adult life working cattle ranches across the Southwest, a solitary man who preferred the company of horses and the vast emptiness of the desert to the complications of human relationships. After losing his wife Constance to tuberculosis 5 years earlier, he'd retreated into isolation, taking jobs on remote ranches where he could work alone. But something about the abandoned wagon demanded investigation. No sensible traveler stopped in this stretch of desert during the heat of the day, unless something was seriously wrong. The nearest water was 8 miles in either direction, and the rocky terrain offered no shelter from the relentless sun. Ryder spurred his horse, a sturdy paint gelding named Chester, down the steep slope toward the road. As he drew closer, he could see that the wagon was a modest affair, the kind used by homesteaders, loaded with household goods and pulled by 2 mules that stood with their heads hanging in the heat. But there was no sign of the travelers who should have been with it. Then he heard the sound that made his blood run cold, a woman's voice, weak and desperate, calling out from somewhere near the wagon, "Help! Please! Someone help me!" Ryder dismounted quickly and followed the voice to a patch of shade on the north side of the wagon, where he found a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A young woman, probably in her mid-20s, lay semi-conscious on a blanket that had been spread on the rocky ground. Her face was flushed with fever, her breathing was labored, and her left leg was grotesquely swollen from the knee down. But it was the note pinned to her dress that filled Ryder with rage. To whoever finds this woman, her name is Evangeline Hartley. She was bit by a rattlesnake 2 days ago and is dying. I cannot waste supplies or time nursing a dying woman when I have to think about my own survival. She made her choice to wander off from camp against my warnings. I wash my hands of the consequences. Herbert Hartley. Ryder read the note twice, unable to believe that any man could abandon his own wife to die alone in the desert. But the evidence was undeniable. Herbert Hartley had left his wife with a single blanket, no water, and no food, expecting her to die while he continued his journey. "Ma'am," Ryder said gently, kneeling beside the woman. "Ma'am, can you hear me? My name is Ryder Mackenzie, and I'm going to help you." Evangeline's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of sagebrush, clouded with pain and fever. "Water," she whispered. "Please, water." Ryder immediately reached for his canteen and carefully lifted her head to help her drink. She was burning with fever, and the snakebite on her leg had clearly become infected during the 2 days she'd been lying in the desert heat. "Ma'am, I need to ask you about the bite. Do you remember what kind of snake it was?" "Rattlesnake," she managed to say between sips of water. "Big one. Bit me when I was gathering firewood." Ryder examined the bite more closely. It was on her lower leg, just above the ankle, and the characteristic twin puncture wounds were surrounded by tissue that was black with necrosis. She should have died within hours of being bitten, but somehow she had survived for 2 days through sheer force of will. "Mrs. Hartley, I'm going to be honest with you. You're in bad shape, but you're alive. and that means we can fight this. But I need to get you to a doctor as quickly as possible. My husband, she started to say. Your husband left you here to die, Ryder said bluntly. But I'm not your husband, and I don't abandon people who need help. The journey to the nearest town, Cimarron, would normally take 6 hours by wagon, but Evangeline was in no condition for the jarring ride over rough desert roads. Ryder made a decision that went against every practical instinct. He would put her on his horse and walk alongside, leading Chester slowly to minimize trauma to her damaged leg. As he lifted Evangeline into the saddle, supporting her weak frame against his chest, he caught the scent of sage and wildflowers that seemed to cling to her hair despite her ordeal. For the first time in 5 years, he found himself acutely aware of holding a woman in his arms. "Why are you helping me?" Evangeline asked as he secured her in the saddle with his rope. Ryder looked up at her face, noting the strength that showed through the pain and fever. This was a woman who had survived 2 days of agony in the desert heat, abandoned by the man who should have protected her, yet she still had the courage to question a stranger's motives. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because no one deserves to die alone." The 8-hour journey to Cimarron tested both of them to their limits. Evangeline drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying out in delirium, sometimes lucid enough to apologize for being a burden. Ryder walked steadily through the heat of late afternoon, the cool of evening, and into the star-filled darkness of the desert night. "Tell me about yourself," she said during one lucid moment when they had stopped to rest beside a small spring. "Not much to tell. I'm a cowboy, work cattle ranches, keep to myself mostly." "Are you married?" Ryder was quiet for a moment. "Was. My wife died 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Evangeline said softly. "That must have been very hard." "It was, but not as hard as what you're going through right now." "My marriage was hard too," she admitted. "Herbert, he's not a kind man. I sometimes think he married me just to have someone to boss around and blame when things went wrong." As they talked through the long night, Ryder began to understand that Evangeline's ordeal went far beyond a snakebite and abandonment. She had been trapped in a marriage to a man who viewed her as property rather than a partner. "Where were you traveling to?" Ryder asked. "Colorado. Herbert heard there was good farming land near Denver, but I think he was running from debts back in Kansas. We left very suddenly, in the middle of the night." By the time they reached Cimarron, Evangeline was unconscious and burning with fever. Dr. Samuel Martinez, the town's physician, took one look at her condition and immediately began preparing for surgery to remove the infected tissue around the snakebite. "Senor," Dr. Martinez told Ryder, "you saved this woman's life by bringing her here. But I must tell you honestly, she's very sick. The infection has spread, and I may have to remove part of her leg to save her life." "Do whatever you have to do, Doc. Just save her." "Are you her husband?" Ryder looked down at the unconscious woman who had somehow, in the space of 8 hours, become the most important thing in his world. "No, but I'm responsible for her now. As doctor." Martinez worked to save Evangeline's life. Ryder sat in the clinic's waiting room and tried to understand what had happened to him during that long walk through the desert. He had started the day as a solitary cowboy, tracking a lost calf. He was ending it as the self-appointed protector of a woman he barely knew. The long road to healing. 3 weeks later, Evangeline Hartley took her first tentative steps around Dr. Martinez's clinic, using a crutch carved from mountain pine to support her weight, while her healing leg adjusted to bearing the load. The surgery had been successful. Dr. Martinez had managed to remove the infected tissue without amputating, though Evangeline would walk with a permanent limp. Ryder had not left Cimarron during her recovery. He'd taken a job at the local livery stable, mucking stalls and tending horses for enough money to pay for Evangeline's medical care and his own modest room at the boarding house. Every evening, he would visit the clinic to check on her progress. "You don't have to stay here because of me," Evangeline told him as they sat on the clinic's front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "I'm sure you have other places to be." Ryder whittled absently at a piece of pine, a habit he'd developed during the long hours of waiting. "Nowhere particular to be, and I want to make sure you're fully recovered before I move on. Ryder, what happens to me when I'm well enough to leave here? I have no money, no family, no way to support myself. Herbert took everything when he left me in the desert." It was a question Ryder had been thinking about constantly. "I've been thinking about that. I know a rancher near Santa Fe who needs help with his household. The pay isn't much, but it includes room and board, and he's a decent man." "You mean I would work as a domestic servant? You would work as a housekeeper and cook? There's no shame in honest work, especially when it provides independence and security." Evangeline was quiet for several minutes. "And what about you? Would you be working at this ranch too?" Ryder felt his pulse quicken. "If you wanted me to, I could probably get hired on as a ranch hand. The owner, Don Carlos Montoya, has a large operation and can always use experienced cowboys. Would that be proper? Us working at the same place, given that I'm still technically a married woman?" It was a question that cut to the heart of their complicated situation. Legally, Evangeline was still married to Herbert Hartley, despite his abandonment. "Evangeline," Ryder said, using her first name for the first time, "I want you to understand something. I'm not asking for anything from you except the chance to make sure you're safe and taken care of." But even as he said the words, Ryder knew they weren't entirely true. Over the past 3 weeks, he had found himself looking forward to their evening conversations with anticipation that went beyond mere concern for her welfare. "What if I wanted it to be something more?" Evangeline asked quietly. The question hung in the evening air between them like a challenge. "Then we'd have to figure out what that means, given your situation." "My situation is that I was abandoned by a man who never loved me, left to die in the desert like a used-up pack animal. My situation is that I'm free of a marriage that was never really a marriage." "Evangeline, the law says you're still married to Herbert Hartley no matter what he did. The law also says a man can abandon his wife to die and face no consequences. Maybe the law isn't always right." Dr. Martinez chose that moment to emerge from the clinic. He had observed Ryder and Evangeline's growing relationship with professional interest, understanding that emotional healing was often as important as physical recovery. "Senora Hartley," he said, "your leg is healing well enough that you could travel if necessary. But I want you to continue exercising it daily." After Dr. Martinez departed, Evangeline and Ryder sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the town. "Ryder, I want to tell you something that I've never told anyone," Evangeline said finally. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." "I want to. The day I was bitten by the snake wasn't entirely an accident. I mean, the bite was accidental, but being away from our camp wasn't." Ryder turned to look at her, sensing that whatever she was about to say would be important. "I had been planning to leave Herbert. I was going to slip away during the night and try to make it back to the last town. I knew it was dangerous, but I thought it was worth the risk." "What changed your mind?" "I lost my nerve. But the next morning, when Herbert sent me to gather firewood, I wandered farther from camp than I should have, because I was still thinking about running away. That's when the snake struck. And Herbert blamed you for wandering off. He said it was my own fault for being careless and stupid. He said that if I died, it would be justice for my disobedience. When he decided to abandon me, he acted like he was being generous by leaving me a blanket." Ryder felt the familiar surge of anger at Herbert Hartley's cruelty, but he also understood the courage it had taken for Evangeline to share this story. "Evangeline, you don't owe me explanations. What matters is that you survived, and now you have a chance to build whatever kind of life you want. What I want is to never again be at the mercy of someone who sees me as disposable. I want to be valued for who I am." "You are valued," Ryder said firmly. "By me, by Dr. Martinez, by everyone in this town who's gotten to know you. Herbert Hartley was a fool who didn't recognize what he had." 2 days later, a rider arrived in Cimarron with news that would change everything. Herbert Hartley had been found dead in his wagon 30 miles east of town. apparently killed during a robbery attempt. The news made Evangeline legally free for the first time since her marriage 7 years earlier. "I should feel something," she told Ryder when Dr. Martinez brought them the news. "Relief or sadness or something, but I just feel empty." "You feel empty because you grieved for your marriage a long time ago," Ryder replied. "This just makes it official." That evening, as they sat on the clinic porch for what would be their last time, Evangeline made a decision that would determine the course of both their lives. "Ryder, I want to go to Santa Fe with you, not as your responsibility or your charity case, but as your partner." "If you'll have me." Ryder set down his whittling and looked at this remarkable woman who had survived abandonment, snakebite, infection, and the loss of everything she'd once called home, yet still had the courage to reach for happiness. "Evangeline, I can't offer you much. I'm a cowboy with no land, no money, and a lot of years behind me. But I can offer you honesty, loyalty, and whatever protection I'm capable of providing." "That's more than I've ever had," she replied. "And it's everything I want. Building a new life." 6 months later, Evangeline Mackenzie stood in the kitchen of the adobe ranch house that she and Ryder now called home, preparing dinner for the crew of the Montoya Ranch, while their new marriage settled into comfortable rhythms of partnership. The small wedding ceremony in Cimarron had been attended only by Dr. Martinez and a few townspeople, but it had marked the beginning of the happiest period of either of their lives. Don Carlos Montoya had proven to be everything Ryder had promised, a fair employer who treated his workers with respect and provided good wages for honest labor. The ranch sprawled across 50,000 acres of high desert grassland, supporting 2,000 head of cattle and employing 15 vaqueros who had welcomed Ryder into their ranks. Evangeline had found her place in the ranch community as well. Her work managing the household for Don Carlos, a widower whose children lived in Mexico City, had expanded to include teaching English to the vaqueros' children and providing basic medical care for ranch families. Her experience with Dr. Martinez had given her practical nursing skills that were invaluable in a remote location. "Senora Mackenzie," called Rosa Montoya, Don Carlos's sister, "the riders are coming in from the south pasture. They will be hungry." "Dinner's almost ready, Rosa." "How many tonight?" 12, I think. Don Carlos said they found the missing cattle, so everyone will be in good spirits." Evangeline smiled as she added final seasonings to the large pot of stew that had been simmering all afternoon. The satisfaction of feeding hard-working men at the end of a long day was something she had never experienced during her marriage to Herbert. As the vaqueros filed into the dining room, their faces wind-burned and clothes dusty from tracking cattle through rough country, Evangeline felt the familiar warmth of belonging to a community that valued her contributions. "Buenas tardes, Senora Mackenzie," said Pedro Vargas, the lead vaquero who had become Ryder's closest friend. "Something smells muy bueno." "Good evening, Pedro. Long day." "Sí, but successful. We found the cattle that wandered into the canyon country." Ryder entered the dining room last, ensuring that all the horses were properly cared for before attending to his own needs. At 39, he had filled out slightly from the regular meals and domestic comfort of married life, but he still moved with easy grace. "Mrs. Mackenzie," he said formally, as he always did when other people were present, "whatever you've cooked smells wonderful." "Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. I hope everyone enjoys it." The formal address was part of a game they played, maintaining proper appearances in public while sharing intimate partnership in private. The vaqueros were amused by the obvious affection between the serious American cowboy and his remarkable wife. After dinner, as had become their custom, Ryder and Evangeline walked to the small garden behind their quarters, where she grew vegetables and herbs for the ranch kitchen. "Good day?" Evangeline asked, slipping her arm through Ryder's. "Very good. We found all the missing cattle, and Pedro says he's never seen the grass in better condition. Don Carlos is talking about increasing the herd size next year. And how do you feel about that?" "I feel like we're building something good here. Don Carlos treats us fairly, the work is satisfying, and you've become essential to the ranch's operations." "But," Evangeline prompted, sensing hesitation. But I sometimes wonder what it would be like to have our own place. Small, maybe just a few 100 acres, but ours. They had reached the wooden bench that overlooked the vast expanse of grassland, stretching toward distant mountains. It was here that they often came to discuss important decisions. "Ryder, there's something I need to tell you," Evangeline said as they sat down. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the evening air like a gift. Ryder turned to look at his wife, seeing in her face the mixture of joy and uncertainty that such news inevitably brought. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I've suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you." Ryder pulled Evangeline into his arms. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified and excited in equal measure. I never had children with Herbert, partly because he didn't want them, and partly because I was afraid to bring children into that kind of marriage. But with you, I can imagine raising a child who grows up knowing they're wanted and loved." "Our child will definitely be wanted and loved," Ryder said firmly. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the last light fade from the western sky while they contemplated the changes a baby would bring. "There's something else," Evangeline said eventually. "Don Carlos has offered to sell us the section of land where the old line shack sits, 500 acres, with water rights to the creek. He says we've proven ourselves as valuable employees, and he'd rather have us as neighbors." Ryder sat up straighter, immediately understanding the significance. The section Evangeline described was prime grazing land with reliable water, the foundation for a successful small ranch operation. "What did you tell him?" "I told him we'd need to discuss it. The price is fair, and he's willing to accept payment over 5 years. With your savings and what I've managed to put aside, we could make the down payment. It would mean giving up the security of steady wages. It would also mean building something of our own, something we could pass on to our children." Ryder looked out over the moonlit grassland that could potentially become their own domain. "What do you think we should do?" Evangeline smiled, recognizing that he was asking for her opinion as an equal partner. "I think we should trust ourselves. We've survived worse challenges than starting a ranch. Then I think we should tell Don Carlos that we accept his offer." That night, as they lay in bed discussing plans for their ranch and their growing family, Ryder reflected on how completely his life had changed since that August day when he'd found Evangeline abandoned in the desert. "Ryder," Evangeline said softly in the darkness, "do you ever think about Herbert? About what would have happened if he hadn't abandoned me?" "Sometimes. But mostly, I think that everything happened the way it was supposed to. His cruelty led to my finding you, and his death freed you to build a new life. I prefer to think of it as a second chance. For both of us, a second chance." Ryder agreed, pulling his wife closer. "And this time we're going to get it right." Full circle. 5 years later, on a crisp October morning in 1892, Evangeline Mackenzie stood on the porch of the ranch house that she and Ryder had built with their own hands, watching their 4-year-old daughter Helena chase chickens around the yard while their 2-year-old son Samuel napped in the shade of the cottonwood tree they had planted their first year. The Mackenzie Ranch had grown from 500 acres to over 2,000, purchased piece by piece as their cattle operation prospered. Ryder had proven as skilled at business as he was at handling cattle, while Evangeline had developed a second career as a midwife and healer, serving scattered ranch families throughout their corner of New Mexico. "Mama, look!" Helena called out, pointing toward the main road where a dust cloud indicated approaching riders. "Someone's coming!" Evangeline shaded her eyes, noting that the riders were moving at the steady pace of people on business rather than urgent speed. As they drew closer, she recognized the lead rider as Sheriff Tom Wilson from Cimarron, accompanied by a man she didn't know and what appeared to be a woman riding side saddle. "Helena, come up on the porch, sweetheart. Let's see what the sheriff wants." Sheriff Wilson, a man in his 50s who had been a friend since their days in Cimarron, dismounted and removed his hat with frontier courtesy. "Mrs. Mackenzie, good morning. Is Ryder around?" He's checking cattle in the north pasture. Is there trouble, Sheriff? No trouble, ma'am. But I have folks here who've been asking questions about you and your husband. This is Mr. James Patterson. He's a lawyer from Denver. And this is Miss Catherine Hartley. At the mention of the name Hartley, Evangeline felt her world shift. She looked more closely at the young woman, noting features that seemed familiar. Miss Hartley, Evangeline said carefully, might I ask your relationship to Herbert Hartley? He was my brother, Catherine replied, dismounting with efficient grace. And I've been looking for you for over a year. Evangeline invited the visitors into her home, serving coffee while Helena played quietly and Samuel continued his nap outside. The sitting room reflected their prosperity without ostentation, a home built for function and family. Mrs. Mackenzie, Mr. Patterson began, Miss Hartley has engaged my services to locate you in connection with her brother's estate. There are significant legal matters that need to be resolved. I wasn't aware that Herbert had any estate to speak of. Catherine Hartley leaned forward with obvious intensity. Mrs. Mackenzie, there are things about my brother that you didn't know. Our family owns considerable property in Kansas, and Herbert inherited a substantial sum when our father died 3 years ago. Evangeline felt confused and defensive. Miss Hartley, your brother abandoned me in the desert to die after a snake bite. Whatever property he may have owned, I certainly have no claim to it. Actually, you do. As his widow, you're entitled to a significant inheritance, but more importantly, I need to understand what really happened during his death. Over the next hour, a story emerged that completely changed Evangeline's understanding of her first marriage. Catherine explained that Herbert had been the black sheep of a prominent Kansas family, a man who had gambling debts and a reputation for violence. When father died and left Herbert money anyway, we hoped he might finally settle down, Catherine said. But instead, he took his inheritance and disappeared, taking you with him. He told me he was a farmer, looking for new land. He never mentioned family money. He probably gambled most of it away before he was killed, Patterson interjected. But there's still a substantial amount held in trust, and under Kansas law, it belongs to his widow. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, and Evangeline looked out to see Ryder riding toward the house with Pedro Vargas, who had become their ranch foreman. That's my husband, Evangeline told her visitors. I think you should hear what he has to say about Herbert's death. When Ryder entered and was introduced to the visitors, his expression immediately became guarded. He listened carefully as Patterson and Catherine explained their purpose. Ma'am, Ryder said to Catherine, I understand you want to know about your brother's death, but I need you to understand something. Your brother left my wife to die in the desert. He abandoned her with a snake bite, no water, no food, and no shelter. I understand that's what you believe happened, Catherine replied. But I've been investigating the circumstances of Herbert's death, and I think there's more to the story. She reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a leather journal. This was found with Herbert's belongings after he was killed. It's his diary, and it tells a very different story than what that note said. Evangeline felt her hands shake as Catherine handed her the journal. The handwriting was definitely Herbert's, but the entries revealed a man tortured by guilt and regret. August 15th, 1887, Evangeline read aloud, I have done something terrible. Evangeline was bitten by a rattlesnake, and in my panic and cowardice I left her behind. I told myself she was going to die anyway, but the truth is, I was afraid. I don't know how to live with what I've done. Ryder moved to stand behind Evangeline's chair, reading over her shoulder, as she continued through entries that revealed Herbert's growing desperation and self-loathing. The final entry was dated just days before Herbert's death. I'm going to Colorado to start over, but I know I'll never escape what I did. I pray that Evangeline survived and found someone better than me. Evangeline closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. He knew, she whispered. He knew he'd done something terrible. Catherine leaned forward. Mrs. Mackenzie, I'm not here to defend my brother's actions. What he did was unforgivable, but I wanted you to know that he suffered for it. and I wanted to make sure you received what is rightfully yours. I don't want his money, Evangeline said firmly. Blood money from a man who left me to die? I won't take it. Then don't take it for yourself, Patterson suggested. Take it for your children, for your community. Use it to help other people who need second chances. Ryder spoke for the first time since the journal was read. How much money are we talking about? Approximately $15,000, Patterson replied, enough to establish a significant foundation. Evangeline looked around her comfortable home, at her children playing peacefully, at her husband who had saved her life and given her love she'd never known was possible. The money represented a part of her past she wanted to leave buried, but it could also represent hope for others. There's something I'd like to do, she said slowly. I'd like to establish a fund to help women who are trapped in bad marriages, who need medical care they can't afford, who need a second chance at building decent lives. Catherine smiled for the first time since arriving. I think Herbert would have wanted that. I think he would have wanted his money to do some good in the world. Indeed, as the visitors prepared to leave, Catherine asked for a private moment with Evangeline. I want you to know that I'm ashamed of what my brother did to you, but I'm also grateful that you survived and found happiness. Miss Hartley, your brother was a weak man who made terrible choices, but his weakness led to my rescue by a man who showed me what real love looks like. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. That evening, as Ryder and Evangeline sat on their porch watching Helena and Samuel play in the yard, they reflected on the strange turn their day had taken. Are you sure you want to take on the responsibility of managing a foundation? Ryder asked. I'm sure. I think it's something I was meant to do. All the experiences I've had, the bad marriage, the abandonment, the rescue, learning to heal and help others, maybe it was all preparation for this. And what about us? What about our family? Evangeline took Ryder's hand, intertwining their fingers as she had done thousands of times over their 5 years of marriage. Ryder, you saved my life in that desert. But more than that, you showed me what it means to be valued and loved. Now I want to help other women discover that same possibility. Then we'll do it together, just like everything else. As the sun set over their ranch, painting the New Mexico sky in brilliant colors, Evangeline reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her from near death in the desert to prosperity and purpose on her own land. Herbert's abandonment had nearly killed her, but it had also led to her rescue by a man whose love had transformed her understanding of what marriage could be. "Mama!" Helena called out as she ran toward the porch. "Tell us the story about how Daddy found you in the desert." It had become the children's favorite bedtime story, a tale of rescue and love that proved that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best chapters of our future. Once upon a time, she began, there was a cowboy riding through the desert who heard someone calling for help. The story of Ryder Mackenzie and Evangeline Hartley proves that sometimes our greatest tragedies become the foundation for our most profound triumphs. What began with a cruel abandonment in the New Mexico desert became a testament to the transformative power of compassion, courage, and the unwavering belief that every human life has value. Today, the Evangeline Mackenzie Foundation continues to help women throughout the Southwest escape abusive situations and build independent lives. The ranch that Ryder and Evangeline built together became a refuge for families in need, and their children grew up understanding that their parents' love story began with an act of kindness that challenged every expectation about duty and loyalty. But perhaps the most important lesson from their journey is this: when we choose compassion over convenience, when we refuse to abandon those in need, when we believe that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, we don't just save others, we discover the best parts of ourselves. Ryder thought he was simply doing the right thing when he rescued a dying woman from the desert. Instead, he found the love that would define the rest of his life. If this incredible story of second chances and the transformative power of love touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes walk among us every day. Subscribe for more amazing tales that prove compassion conquers cruelty and that true love can bloom in the most unexpected places. Don't forget to let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love hearing from our global family who believes in the power of kindness to change the world. Have you ever been rescued by someone's unexpected kindness? Or have you been the one to offer help when someone desperately needed it? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly the inspiration someone else needs to hear today. Remember, we all have the power to be someone's hero when the moment calls for courage.